people. Why don't we wait like one more minute?
Oh, perfect. That'll give me enough time to see if I can see everybody's beautiful faces over here.
Panina, I posted something in the chat for everybody.
Okay, dokie.
I agree, Panini. Let's give it one more minute. We'll give everyone a chance.
Like I said, I'm trying to join on a second computer so that I can see the chat and stuff. If at all possible. If it is at all possible to do both, I will. Let's see, then Talia, I'll be trying to be two. With one tuchus, I'll be trying to be at two weddings at the same time.
There's another Panina-ism.
That was from my bubby. That was, you could not be dancing with one tuchus. Could not be dancing at two weddings at the same time.
All right, well, why don't we try to get started, Panina?
Okie dokie, perfect. And oh, yes, are you guys hearing a reverb from me?
Nope, loud and clear.
Perfect. Okay, great. So I can advance my slides on one and see people in the other if need be. All right, so I think many people here know me, but for those of you who don't, I'm Panina Siegel, and we are going to do, today we're going to do a type 1 diabetes forum, and I hope you brought your lunch. Just a little bit about me. I went to med school at USC. I did my residency in family medicine at VCMC, Ventura County Medical Center. I did a fellowship in family planning back at USC in the Department of OBGYN, and I got a master's during my fellowship. I like edible gardening. A little known fact, I was a foreign exchange student in high school, and I lived in the Netherlands. So, see, if anybody speaks Dutch, kom wel een beetje Nederlands. So, I will be happy to talk to you. And then the reason, as I'm sure most people know, that I am qualified to give this talk, other than being a physician, is that I've had type 1 diabetes for the last 42 years. So this is something that I could talk about a lot. Okay, so the primary objective of this talk is to understand some of the common medications and supplies that people with type 1 diabetes might need and how to prescribe them. You might also learn to empathize with some of the struggles that people living with type 1 diabetes face, and to identify ways to support patients with type 1 diabetes using telemedicine. So first, I just want to go over how a functioning pancreas works. So there is a normal amount of baseline insulin that is consistently being made in the pancreas. So you'll see that here, that there's just, even when the patient is not eating, right, here's breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that there's this baseline level that's being secreted. And it is responsive to stress hormones and things like that, but there's always some, and it's consistently working 24/7, 365 days a year. And then on top of it, right, there's this bolus insulin. That is what is released immediately after consuming energy, generally in the form of carbohydrates. And it responds to and manages the subsequent rise in blood sugar. And so if you have a normal functioning pancreas, you really shouldn't feel your blood sugar going up at any point. So now what happens if your pancreas does not do this? So if those of you who can't see, it's a meme. It says, come on, do stuff. And for those of you who follow anything on TikTok or social media, one of the hashtags is type 1 warrior. My favorite, diabetes. But it is what it is. So you need to take exogenous insulin, basically. This slide is very, very busy, but it does explain, right? How do we mimic that effect that the normal pancreas does? Some of you probably remember back when we would use NPH. That's really fallen out of favor. And so really what we're doing is mostly bolusing with short-term insulin, and then using the long-acting insulins as a basal insulin. And you can see that those have a minimal peak. So it's consistently giving you some insulin. The exception to that is people who have an insulin pump. The pump is giving out a little bit of insulin all the time. So it is reacting similar so I just wanted to show you how that looks, right? So the insulin effect on the top two slides are someone on glargine or detromere for their long acting, and then they're bolusing with the short acting, the Aspart or Lispro for breakfast, lunch, supper, or snack. And then again, the insulin infusion rate, and that's sort of pre-programmed, right, at a certain amount per hour. So it covers, dawn phenomenon, SMOGI, blah, 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 all that stuff that you guys don't really need to know about. Okay, so what is the problem? The problem is that although there have been a lot of advances, this does not equal this, right? So it is, you're kind of constantly playing catch up, and it can sometimes feel like this. So you're on a blood sugar roller coaster. And why, and how is that? So hypoglycemia, as you know, it can be a result of a lot of things. Some of them, you guessed wrong on a meal how many carbohydrates it has, or you were nauseous and couldn't finish eating your meal, or you did some exercise that wasn't planned. This is what you are supposed to tell patients to do. So sometimes patients will say, well, I drank a whole glass of orange juice. So you're supposed to be treating hypoglycemia with the 15-15 rule. So eat or drink 15 grams of carbohydrates, wait 15 minutes, and recheck your blood sugar. And here's some sources of 15 grams of carbohydrates. So like a 4-ounce juice box is one. So I carry those because the usual juice boxes are 6.75 ounces. Or 2 packets of regular sugar. So if you're, going hiking or something, you're going to be out. There's glucose tabs, there's glucose gel, etc. And so what you will find though, so this is when your blood sugar is low and someone walks in on you stuffing your face, sometimes you'll find, the patients will find, if anybody's ever had low blood sugar, that you have this impending sense of doom or death. And you just want to eat everything in sight. So it's really hard to do this sometimes, especially when you're really low. And of course that can contribute to the roller coaster feeling. Oh, and I was just saying that the tiny juice boxes, so Juicy Juice makes one of them. Okay. So hyperglycemia, again, often caused by not bolusing or under bolusing. This can be intentional or unintentional. You can see in this meme, wondering if the bartender in the loud bar heard you say Diet Coke. So when I was a kid, I almost wound up in DKA once because I went to, my mom took me to the drive-thru at McDonald's. We ordered a Diet Coke and it was a regular, and I drank some of it, and then I started kind of acting weird. And so my mom was smart enough to take the thing, a test strip, and put some of the liquid on it. And she was like, whoa, it says, cannot read too high. We went home, I took a bunch of insulin, and I turned out to be okay. But it's, you really have to be careful about these, especially obviously in pediatric patients, but we're for the most part not really doing that. So what happens when your sugar is high? You do a correction bolus. And so this is what I like to call the insulin, formerly known as the sliding scale. You guys can all laugh now. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, get it? It's like the print symbol and then the Dexcom meter and it's French. Anyways, so why don't we call it a sliding scale anymore? So a sliding scale implies that you're just always playing catch up, right? Like no matter when your blood sugar is high, you just do this. And really that takes away from, at some point, you should be sitting down with your logs or your printouts in conjunction with your doctor or family member or by yourself and looking at this and saying, wow, I'm having to give correction dose every morning. I'm waking up high. I probably need more long-term of the long-acting insulin. You know, my body's needs are changing for some reason. And so that's why I like to call it we like to call it a correction bolus. And this is just how, or the insulin sensitivity factor. And this is just how you calculate that for anybody who's interested. It's the rule of 18 Humalog, or the rule of 1500 for regular, and that's your total daily insulin. And that's divided by, 1800 divided by your total daily insulin, and that will tell you how much 1 unit will lower your sugar. So you can imagine, you know, instead of using a blank like 50, you know, your blood sugar is 200 to 250, you give 1 unit, your blood sugar is 250 to 300, you give 2 units. Instead of just having a blanket, this kind of gives you, so you have a person like myself who's, you know, 4'9 3/4, I would take less insulin, say, than, you know, 1 unit will lower my sugar more than perhaps if Shaq was diabetic. Okay, so, and then how do we calculate the total daily dose? That is basically your weight in pounds divided by 4, or your 0.55 times your weight in kilograms. Okay, so now we're going to go back to that because this is the interactive piece of the talk that I was talking about, where I want people to pull out their lunch. I don't have to look at it, but we're just going to practice seeing like how you would calculate that, right? So some people say, oh,
This is Anita. There's a question.
Oh,
One
question?
person raised their hand.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, does the insulin pump change the basal level of insulin based on glucose level feedback, or is it the same basal level continuously?
Now that's a very good question. So there are the newer, and I'll talk about this later in the talk, there are the newer quote unquote closed loop pumps, and they do some receptive feedback in terms of if the sugar is going high or low. It can change. It cannot adjust for things like a forgotten bolus. So generally what will happen if you forget to bolus for some reason, you're busy, you're running around, the CGM that's linked to it will start beeping and will tell you that your sugar is rising very rapidly. And that might be if you had time, you sit down, you look at it, that gives you a symbol to go ahead and just bolus, you know. Then you're kind of playing catch up again though, and if you over bolus, then you're getting low, and you know, so you definitely want to be careful on that. But it is so it can be that, and that is very good. And we can talk about some of the other pump features later, but that is one of the good things about it. One of the downsides of it is that let's say you get an air bubble in your tubing or your pump gets clogged, you are only taking short acting insulin. So, you know, or the pump, the site gets ripped out. So if you don't have any long acting on board, you need to get somewhere immediately, and you need to have a more robust emergency kit that's kind of, you know, especially if you're going to be far away from home, that's with you. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. And somebody raised their hand, but I don't see who raised it anymore. So maybe they put their hand down.
Okay. Okay, so has everybody calculated their total daily dose of insulin? Because you're going to need this. So you're just your weight in pounds divided by 4. Unless you feel the urge, you don't need to share this with us. Okay. And so the next thing that we're going to do is calculate a meal bolus. So what used to happen, or when I was younger, you would take your regular and your NPH insulin. When that NPH insulin peaked, you had to eat. And so there's a set number of carbohydrate exchanges, 15 units of carbohydrates that you would have to eat at that meal. So if you weren't feeling good and you'd already given your insulin, again, now you're at increased risk for getting very low blood sugar. Or, I was actually one of the first kids they put on the pump because I was a professional actress when I was a kid. And so they would, they would call lunch on the set at different times. And then, if my insulin started kicking in, my NPH, I would get low. And so it was difficult. And that's when they decided to put me on a pump. That's neither here nor there. Okay. You can stop my randomness. Okay. So, but there's no set. So the patients don't have to take 10 units at breakfast, lunch, and dinner anymore. Okay, so now we use what's called the insulin to carb ratio, and that's 500 divided by your total daily dose. That's why I had you calculate your total daily dose, equals the grams of carbohydrates you can eat after you take 1 unit. So again, as you can imagine, especially for smaller kids, you're giving insulin in half a unit. Or even smaller, whereas, in adults who weigh more are doing that. And of course, this is a general rule, right? You still have to make modifications because there's insulin resistance and all sorts of other things, but this is just, patient that, just a general idea of, and this is kind of a way you can also check, is the patient, it has any, is their ballpark correct? Then, of course, you're going to plan for how many carbs you're going to eat. And then that becomes your meal bolus. So your insulin to carb ratio times the number of grams of carbohydrates you're planning is how much insulin you're going to give. Does anybody, oh my God, Jessica, please don't search for me on IMDb. You can do that later. Okay. So what if someone eats a non-carb meal is a question. That is a very good question. So that's a freebie, right? So if I eat, if I have a breakfast of nopales and eggs, I don't have to give any insulin for that. So, that's a good, if you're hungry, that's a good way to, and it's healthy too, right? However, eating protein is also very helpful, right? Is that helps keep your blood sugar stable. So anyways, are all carbs equal, or carbs like veggie or high fiber? Yeah. So we, when you're calculating the total number of carbs, if it has very high fiber content, you give less insulin. But I think that's like this talk too. I'm just trying to give some general kind of information. But yes, definitely when you're calculating, you would take the fiber off, and some of and most of the veggies, like you can eat them, except for potatoes and such, like, carrots, you can eat them raw without any problem. For some reason, when they're cooked, you need insulin for that if you're eating a lot of them. Does anybody have any question about this calculation specifically? Okay, so I'm going to ask somebody to volunteer and share. Oh, it looks like Carlo is raising his hand. Carlo, can you unmute yourself?
Yep. Hi.
Hi.
So I brought my lunch here with me. It's a whole bag of Doritos.
Awesome.
My favorite. Love it. So I think we're sharing how to do this, right? That's what we're doing.
Mhm, mhm.
So my insulin to carb ratio based off my weight or would be around 1 to 10
Mhm.
if I calculated that correctly. So my insulin requirement is 50, and so it would be 1 to 10. And so I think I've got here that there is, let's see, it says I have 18 grams of carbohydrates. And so if I eat this entire bag of chips, I would only need 2 units of insulin. Is that correct, Panina?
Well, Carlo's gonna need some Wegovy. That's hilarious. Okay. Well, as you guys must know, this was actually staged. So thank you, Carlo, for humoring me. So you have to look at the serving size, right? So 1 ounce is about 12 chips. And 12 chips has 18 grams of carbohydrates. So if you're 1 to 10, if you were only going to eat 12 chips, of course, that would be the right amount of insulin would be 2 units. So, so this is a 9.5 ounce bag. So for this bag at 2 units an ounce, right, instead of 2 units of insulin, you would need like 19 units of insulin. And how big is your bag, Carlo?
It is, I think, the same size as the one you have, 14 and a half ounces.
Okay, so that's a 14 and a half. So how much insulin do you really need?
A lot more than 2 units.
Yeah. Yeah. So that like 30 units. So if you're a type 1 diabetic and you do that, you will probably put yourself into DKA. So you know, this is just an example of how you have to be really, really careful. And again, I can give you numerous examples of this, but you know, I'm running out the door, I'm busy. I pour my cereal directly in a bowl and I go, oh, that looks like a cup and a half. And I eat my cereal and I run out the door. You know, for me, a cup and a half, you know, of Cheerios, that's 45 grams of carbohydrates. So I give insulin for that. But if it was actually 2 cups, which, you know, in a bowl, you can sometimes not tell the difference. And that's 60 grams of carbohydrates. So based on my insulin to carb ratio, if I eat an extra half cup of cereal, that raises my blood sugar almost 100 points. And so now, you know, if I started out my meal at like, you know, if I was even a little bit high, like 150, now I'm at 250. So you can see how this is kind of difficult and just grading on you, right? I mean, if you think about the patients, they're doing this calculation, and every single item of food that they look at, they need to know exactly how many carbohydrates it has and or make an educated guess. And so they say, you know, the average type 1 diabetic is making an additional, like, you know, close to several hundred decisions in a day, just based on, like, you know, this and what activities they're doing, etc. Yes, Suniti?
There are a couple of requests to go back through the calculations and go back through the slides again, and then an example of the correction bolus also.
Okay. Yeah, so I can do that. So the correction bolus, the rule for 1800 for Humalog or for any of the short actings is 1800 divided by the total daily dose. So for example, if my total daily dose were, you know, 60 units, then 1 unit would lower my sugar by 30. So instead of starting my sliding scale at, or my correction bolus at 200, right, I might want to start a pre-meal at, like, say 160. So if I'm 160 to 190, I'm going to give 1 unit. If I'm 190 to 210, I'm going to give 2 units. And that, so if I'm at 160 and I start, that'll bring my sugar back down to 130. And so that kind of gives you like a safer estimate. And again, I'm going to get to some slides that are like, this is what you really, really, really need to know, because I know that for some of you guys, I live this. So for me, it's like, okay, this is what it is. But for some people, I know that this can probably be a little bit anxiety provoking. So we'll get through to the what you really, really need to know.
Panina, another question is if there's like an app or a website that would help with these calculations?
Yeah, so the link on the bottom is the UCSF website. That's my favorite because they have a lot of really good for type 1 and type 2, like very specific educational things, just for some for physician and some for patients. Yeah. Okay, and then so the insulin to carb, so again, all of this is based on a total daily dose. That's why, you know, if the patient already has it, has a total daily dose, then it's easy. They can tell you, they can look at their pump and tell you how much that they take a day, or, you know, you can add up based on how many units they generally take a day. Is there, yes, you'll be getting the slides to review later, and I'm also happy to, I can put them on my shared Google file if anybody wants to look at them. My EC talk is on there, and I have a bunch of GYN stuff on there too, and I'm happy to put more diabetes stuff on there. So if there's no more questions about food, okay, Shannon, so if my total daily dose is 45, then my insulin to carb is, yes, that looks about right. Yeah. 11. Exactly. So, you know, some of these things are plus minus. Most foods, if, you know, this gets to the point of us always telling people who are diabetic, well, make food at home and eat healthy. Sometimes it's easier just to get something that's pre-made because you can see exactly how many carbohydrates are on it. Like, and so, you know, I often will do a combination of, you know, carbohydrates that if I'm going to eat them, that I can count. Like I know a Red's burrito, breakfast burrito has 37 grams of carbohydrates. And I can always count on that versus, you know, if I make my own, then now I'm weighing and measuring everything. Or I get one at a restaurant that I don't know. So, you know, and then combine that with some veggies that are, quote, free foods. But a lot of things come like in 15s in terms of grams of carbohydrates. So, you know, if you're 1 to 11, if you call that a 1 to 10, just to make your life easier, or like for the patient, for the most part, it's, you know, close enough and it's fine. And then people can tweak it as it goes. And the patients might not call them, right? They're not like my insulin to carb ratio and my insulin sensitivity factor. They just know it as what they, how much insulin they give when they're high, or how much insulin they give to eat. So thank you so much, Carlo, for agreeing to this. Okay, so this is just a slide about the many faces of the A1C. And so I think it's important for people to understand that the A1C is not the end all be all of life. And when we talk about like people with eating disorders and, you know, all sorts of issues, you know, that can happen. So here you see that there is an A1C that is 7, and this patient is their sugars are in range all the time. So that is, you know, excellent. Their sugars are well controlled. So this is not going to be a perimenopausal, you know, or a pubescent female at all, because that's not going to happen. But, you know, we're trying here. We're trying to get in that range. Here's what you will see a little bit more commonly. Maybe somebody is high most of the time and low sometimes. In a patient like this, I really would try to avoid hypoglycemia, because that's more immediately dangerous. And so sometimes in a patient like this, again, these are nuanced things that I don't expect anybody to do, but just, you know, make sure that basal insulin, that they're not getting low, or if they're on a pump and they're always getting low at noon, then, you know, you give them less basal insulin at that time. And then again here, so you see a patient on a total roller coaster. They're in range about 40% of the time, they're high about 40% of the time, and they're low 20% of the time. And you're going to see this a lot in patients who are on PlushCare. So even when you get an A1C and you're like, oh yeah, you're doing great, they may or may not be actually doing great, because 60% of the time they kind of don't feel good. Okay, so now here's a slide of what you actually need to know. Okay, what do the pharmacists want to know? They want to know what is the maximum amount of insulin that the patient is going to need. So on CrossCover, and I'm sure all the other CrossCover docs can tell you this, when you write as directed in insulin pump without putting a maximum daily dose, those bounce back almost uniformly. So that's one thing that bounces back, and also the number of ml. So we're going to talk about that. So it's most patients know how much insulin they take in a day. And the average, you can ask them about how much insulin do you take in a day too, not maximum, but the maximum will account for like variation in meals, right? You go out, sick days, days when you're high, if your pump malfunctions, because the last thing that you want is for a patient to run out of insulin or be rationing their insulin. You know, a lot of patients, when they come to PlushCare, they're running themselves like just in that like 180 to 240 range, so they can stay out of DKA, but they can make their insulin last longer. So when in doubt, more insulin, not less. Okay, so let's say a patient says they take 30 units of insulin a day. 30 units a day times 30 units is 900 units or 9 ml, right? Most insulin comes as U100 or 100 units per ml. There are U200 insulins, but generally for type 1s, they're using the U100 unless they're really insulin resistant, which can obviously happen in adulthood, right? We can become overweight and obese like everybody else and get insulin resistance on top of having a malfunctioning pancreas. So one pen is 3 ml or 300 units, and they come as 5 pens in a box. So this is very important because this is another reason that things bounce back. A patient has 9 ml, you think, oh, that's 9 pens, and you write 9. The pharmacy may or may not dispense that. They usually only dispense the pens in a box of 15 ml with 5 pens in them. So that's one way to do it if you're doing a pen. And then a vial is 10 ml in a vial. So a sample of this would be if you're writing, you know, Humalog up to 10 units, sub-Q TID, dispense 15 ml or 1 box. So this patient, even though she only needs 9 ml, so she's got extra insulin, you know, if you were writing for a 3-month supply, then you would write 2 boxes, and that's, you know, 30 ml. So 9 times 3. So you're gonna, you know, at 3 months, you would be like more within what they actually need, but it's fine. They're not gonna, you know, go sell it on the street. And then same thing, something like Novolog, Humalog, up to 30 units daily via insulin pump. And there's a feature on all the pumps where you can look at it and it can tell you like how much insulin you've taken, and patients can scroll back for several days and say, okay, you know, this day I took 30, this day I took 40. Here I took, you know, 50. Okay, so on average, I take about 40 units a day. Or you could say with that, okay, the most you ever take is 50. So I'm going to write it that way. Okay. Here's another thing we get on the pens. Will they have if you round up from 9 to 15, but you put Sigmax 30 units a day? No, the insurance won't have an issue with it because that's the minimum amount that you can prescribe. It's just like, you know, the eye drops. If you know, we write for X amount. And so you know, you may or may not, if you have conjunctivitis, use that whole bottle, but that's what you're getting because that's how it comes. Can we just always write the RX in ML? I'm sure everybody would, the pharmacist would love it. Can you discuss adding the maximum daily dose? Oh, CGM. Yes, I love educational CGMs. At onset, yeah. So they can see. That's a good question, Sarah. And I'm going to get to CGMs at the end. So the pharmacy won't round to the nearest box. Unfortunately, no. So it's maybe some will, but I know you can talk to the rest of the cross cover team. We get this a lot. And we'll talk about CGM because that is, I really do think, I know that people say it's not indicated for type 2, but being able to look in real time, I ate this and this is what my blood sugar did. It did a spike, or it did a slow rise, or it did a whatever, like gives them a visual of what it is. So I agree with that. I've had patients traveling who need insulin refill, can't tell me the info about their usual RX or max dose. Sounds like they could look it up on their pump. Yes. So, yes, they should be able to look it up on their pump. And we're also going to talk about a little bit about diabetes burnout towards the end, because a lot of times, not a lot, but some of the times the patients are just so over it. Like, it's not that they don't necessarily, or they never knew, they just, somebody who doesn't know their insulin, how much insulin they take, that, you know, may be very seriously burned out and probably isn't regularly taking their insulin. Again, they're just kind of sliding themselves through to stay out of DKA. I'm sorry, yes, 1,000 units. Dr. Doyle, that is correct, not 10,000. And yeah, I mean, the type 2 is another issue. I think we'll get into, like, a Libre for a couple weeks might be useful if you think that the patient can use the feedback or they want the feedback. But that's out of the scope of what I'm talking about right now. Okay, so pen needles. This is another error that we see a lot. The only pen needles that we have in our EMR are the Novafine. Okay, there's tons of people who make them. It does not matter. And it doesn't matter if it's a 4 millimeter or a 6 millimeter. So the Novafine Plus is a 6 millimeter needle. The other one's a 4 millimeter needle. I mean, you can see this is a visual of both the Novafine and the Novafine Plus. And you can see they both, I mean, the injection is subcutaneous, so you're not trying to get in the muscle or anything. The pen needles, so that's a unit that you can select. And generally, pen needles come as 100 pen needles in a box. And one way that we can avoid having any problems is because some of the insurances want BD, or some of them want, you know, a different brand. And that is that brand. Okay, so normally when I'm talking to a patient and my pump beeps like this, I just keep talking and I silence it, but I am going to be good and have it tell me, oh, my blood sugar is 165. Thank you very much. Okay. So dispense any compatible pen needle covered by insurance to inject sub-Q QID, right? If they're doing basal and bolus, or it might be 5 times a day. Okay, so just to go over some stuff for you know, insulin pumps and CGMs. Okay, so the insulin pump, this is a Medtronic. This is what I have. So the insulin pump itself, it comes with a reservoir. So that, so the tip here covers an insulin vial, and you will draw out the insulin here. So you can see you can put up to 300 units of insulin in it, and that will sit right here inside the pump when you load it. Okay, and so then you take off the blue thing, and that connects to the tubing. This thing right here, you connect it to your body, you click it down, and it puts the needle in, and then there's the tubing that connects to it. Sometimes, you still want to give the patient, if they don't have one, a glucometer, because sometimes even if they have the CGM, the glucometer fails, or like the Medtronic, it needs to be calibrated, and that they need strips, they need lancets. And then there's the CGM, right? And so that comes depending on the type of CGM. You've got the transmitter, you've got, the sensor, which is what you get inserted into the body. You have the transmitter, and some of the transmitters have a docking station. So this is the transmitter that will lock into here or in this picture. And then this is the docking station because it needs to recharge. So that's just the Medtronic. That the Dexcom is every 3 months and it comes pre-charged. And this is how it looks going in. So the sensor has a pretty big needle on it, and it's supposed to last for a week. And that is with the Medtronic. The other ones are separate. And this is what I was going to say about the Talia said there's probably there are a couple of other pen needles if you search 32. Okay, so I just typed in pen needle, but if you type in 32, there are some other ones. But either way, no matter what you do, there's no way that you can predict. It's like eardrops. You have no idea which one the insurance company is going to cover. So just, if it connects to the pen and the insurance covers it, that's what we want. So we just put that in the SIG. I'm not going to go back to that, but anyone that's covered that is compatible with their pen. Okay, so there are three closed loop sensors systems. There's the Medtronic, the Guardian 3 sensor, and that works with the Medtronic pump. And then there's the Dexcom G6, and that works with the Omnipod or the Tandem T-Slim. And so there's 2 separate ports, right? There's the needle that you change every 3 months, and then there's the sensor. And then, so with the Medtronic, you have to calibrate the sensor. So you put it in, you can't really eat, or you can only eat free food for like 2 hours while you're waiting for it to be ready to calibrate. You calibrate it. Then it sends a message to your pump, and then your pump will say what your blood sugar is. And a lot of the pumps, especially in the closed loop, will have the insulin to carb ratio and the ISF already in it. So you just have to tell it what your blood sugar is and how many carbs you're going to eat, and it will calculate that for you. So again, if you're eating something that is already done, it's already says the number of carbs on it, then it's easy. But otherwise it's it's a guess. Who programs the pump? Usually the endocrinologist programs the pump. You can look at downloads and make some minor changes yourself, but so the closed loop systems all have what's it called, like a honeymoon, not a honeymoon, but like a calibration period where you're wearing it for like 2 to 4 weeks, and you pre-program the basals and the basal insulin. And then, so you figure out like what your baseline is, and you work with your endocrinologist to balance that. And then once you have that, then you go into what's called quote auto mode. And then again, with some feedback from the transmitter, it can make some minor adjustments, but it's not going to, if you completely forget to eat, give your insulin. And, I know people are saying, I know a lot of times we talk about, diabetic patients. But if you think about how many times do you measure your breakfast, remember to give your insulin, your kids got to get to school on time. You know, there are things that happen that, you know, you could see how somebody occasionally might forget a bolus. So that then, though, ideally the pump, right, which is here keeping track of your sugar, will alert you when you're high or getting high, and then that will prompt you to look back at the data on your pump and say, oh shoot, you know, I forgot to give my insulin and give it. So here is a very busy slide about all the CGMs. I think the main thing, because we're running really low on time, and I know I really wanted to have time for questions, so you guys can always email me afterwards or DM me. For most patients, if they do not have a pump, the Freestyle Libre really is an acceptable option, especially the Libre 3. It gives you real-time data. It goes straight to your phone. It's only $150 a month. It's got the sensor and the transmitter are integrated, so you're just putting one thing in. You don't have to remember to charge it, not charge it on a docking station, etc. It does not integrate with a pump. It will give you a urgent alert for low, and then it will customize. You can put in custom alarms for it to alert you on your phone when you are low or high. The warm-up time is less. You don't need to calibrate it. I mean, really, honestly and truly, can patients get started these at home? Yeah, a Libre is easy. A Libre is easy to calibrate at home. All you have to do is, I mean, obviously there's an app you have to download, so you have to have some, you know, understanding, but the phone works as the reader. And then, you know, you scan it, you can look at it, it automatically is transmitting, and you can tell it, right? Like, again, that situation where, like I said, where like, if you forget to give your insulin, for example, you want it to alert you maybe when you're 220, so you don't get above 240 and, you know, go into DKA. And same thing, low. Now the Dexcom and the Medtronic, what are the benefits of some of those? And don't get me wrong, I mean, they're awesome. They're also very expensive. You can see here, I put for the Medtronic Guardian, don't ask how much that costs. It's ridiculous. It will tell you, oh, Dr. Marks has office hours coming up. It will tell you like predictive low and high and the delta change. So that is, whereas the Freestyle Libre, you won't know until you're high that it starts beeping. The Dexcom and the Medtronic will send a message to your pump fairly early on. Like if you know, accidentally misguessed your carbs and now you're high. And so, you know, it really does help to keep you out of DKA. You know, those CGMs last less time. Someone asked a question about the, which I didn't put in here. Oh, I did put the cost. But in terms of, yeah, so those are good if you have a pump or if you're a type 1. I mean, I know they're marketing the Dexcoms to type 2, but most of the time people are not as insulin sensitive and they don't really need that. So because the best part about it is, you know, the A, you know, hypoglycemia, unawareness, etc., and B, you know, the predictive change and letting you know when your sugars are getting high. And in terms of effort, I mean, you know, this versus finger sticks, you're looking at a MARD anywhere between like a, you know, 4 and 30%. So in the extremes, in the lows and the highs, all of these things are off. So patients might tell you, oh, you know, when I start getting low and my pump is beeping low, it will tell me my sugar, it will give me an arrow down and say 50, but I'm really like 30, or I'm really, 70. And so at those extremes of blood sugar, they're not as point on. In terms of the MARD for, the Dexcom is like 7 to 8. The Freestyles are like 8. The Medtronic Guardian, same thing, as like 8 to 9. So it's really, the Freestyle is comparable. The finger sticks, the MARD on like a really good machine like the Contour Next is like 4. So obviously those are closer, but you're not getting real-time data. And so that's why with the Medtronic, you calibrate it with a meter to try to get that MARD to be better. Okay, so Mara, also a diabuddy. She said, you're going to overwhelm people with all this stuff. So at the end of the day, what's the most important thing? Is the patient in DKA, yes or no? If yes, then you send them to the ED or the urgent care. And if no, you give them insulin. Most of the patients that are coming on PlushCare, they've either or they've had a pump, CGMs, pens, but now they lost their insurance and they need the cheapest alternative, or they're a lot of times it's that they got a new insurance, so they need a new prescription and they can tell you exactly what they need. But sometimes it is that they lost it. So, the number one priority, again, is to get the patient insulin. So this is just some information about how you would convert the insulin. Like if they were on a pump and now they have to go on a bolus and basal. This, 40 to 50%, again, based on their total daily dose, is short acting, and 50 to 60% is basal. Vials are obviously cheaper than the pens, but you have to, prescribe the syringes. And here's just some of the pricing. Again, we really don't like to use the NPH, but if you had to, you could. It's just the patient needs to eat 6 to 8 hours after, because you're going to get that second peak for the long acting. But the Novolog Novolin R and generic Humalog are like less than $40 a vial on GoodRx, and then generic Glargine is the same. Oh, yes, please don't write like CGM supplies. There are text blazes for this. And if you just write CGM supplies, it winds up getting submitted just like that. The prior auth people send it in. And then, of course, it's not covered because you need specifics. So when in doubt, there are text blazes for that, for the Dexcom. Like I said, the Freestyle, it's already in our EMR as a prescription, and it's cheaper. So really the Dexcom, I think, somebody might argue with me, but I think we really only need those for people who are on pumps or are type 1. Other prescriptions that patients might need, glucagon, ketone sticks to check if their sugars are over 240 or they're throwing up or they have a sick day. All these things that I put on the bottom are all information about sick day planning and, making sure that patients have that patients know what supplies they need to have for this or for travel. Again, that's probably beyond the scope of this talk. And also, most important, if you don't know, it's okay. It's okay if you don't know, right? This meme says, the doctor says, don't confuse your Google search with my 6 years of medical school. And the patient says, don't confuse the 1-hour lecture you had on my condition of my 20 years living with it. So a lot of you are probably just asking the patients, right? What do you need? And they know. So other things that I just want to remind you, type 1 diabetes is a 24/7, 365 unpaid job that you never get a day off from. And the patient probably also has a real job and family. And so, what I like to remind people is that the A1C is just a number, right? Numbers are not inherently good or bad. They don't make you a good person or a bad person. The patients are sick of going to the endocrinologist and being told they're a bad diabetic or their A1C is terrible. The A1C what I tell them is this reflects a point in time. It tells me where you are in your life, and it provides information so we can make adjustments to your treatment regimen. You know, if there's all these external factors are too much, we might need to take away some of those external factors because this is has to be your primary job. So again, please don't lecture. Most adults living with type 1 diabetes already know that diabetic complications are real and that they cause disability and death. And by threatening them, like you're going to die, that's not helping. A lot of times people are accessing care. Again, this is a unique thing that we have about telemedicine. Previously, these patients would wind up in the ER because they would just burn out on their diabetes. They're sick of doing it. They're not doing their injections or only doing some of their injections. They're reaching out to you for help. And so, you know, I even ask patients, what's one thing you could do, right? That before I see you next, you know, okay, I'm going to set an alarm and remember to take my shot or, you know, in the morning or whatever it is so that, you know, they're accessing. And the other thing too is don't assume that an adult endocrinologist knows more than you, because a lot of times they don't. The patients, you know, you get these nice type 1 diabetes centers when you're a kid, and there's a social worker and a this and a that and a nutritionist. And then when you're out on your own, you see a private endocrinologist who may or may not have any other patients like on a pump. So, you know, again, as this in terms of diabetes, distress, or burnout, in any 18-month given period, about 30 to 50% of type 1 diabetics will experience burnout. And so inviting these people to stay with PlushCare as their medical home, even if you're making a referral to endocrine, you know, kidney specialist, having somebody that they can just see online is so valuable, so that if they do get burnt out, you know, you can write for them their supplies, or they can feel comfortable talking to you about, you know, needing an antidepressant or things like that. So I just want to say thank you. Lastly, when you're an adult, no one asks you what your favorite dinosaur is. It's like they don't even care. So I just want you to know that I care about your favorite dinosaur. We even have a I care about your favorite dinosaur chat. And now I'm open for questions. Hello, is anyone awake?
It's 12:59. I think you answered all the questions up until 12:49. But we only have 1 minute left, so
Oh,
great. Do you want to answer real fast?
I think we'll have to
Really
stop
Count
there.
said,
I think so many people have things to do that we're just going to have to, there's a million questions we could ask. But thank you, Penina. We really appreciate you coming and speaking to this. And I believe you're available on Slack if people want to ask their questions there too. Sure.
anytime on any question, any help with the patient. If you want to refer the patients to me, I have 26 state licenses. I have a lot of type 1 diabetic patients, and I really enjoy caring for them, and I think I do a great job. So myself, or Mara also, she has some states that I don't have, is also a diabuddy. So Maggie Lee said, can we start a Penina group chat? All right. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for listening. It really